I'm Beth Benjamin. I'm the current president of Fine Arts Foundation. I welcome you all here. I see artists and student artists and artist students and people from so many groups. Thank you for coming. This is our last program of this season. Ren. And I just encourage you, if you're not on our mailing list, if you don't get our newsletter, we make a very nice monthly newsletter that will tell you what's up and what's going on. And also, if you sign for the newsletter, you'll get a nice mailing from us this summer with the program brochure for next year. So I'm going to say a few things about T. Pacini, who is our speaker today. And forgive me, I'm just going to read them. After a successful career in the New York City corporate world, T. Pacini came to realize she was climbing the wrong ladder. Stepping away from this chaotic world, T. began an extensive focus in ceramics, studying at the University of Central Florida, Arrowmont School of Craft, the International Workshop of Ceramic Art in Tokoname, Japan, Alfred University, and Fuping, China, and her experience includes working closely with Peter Voulkos. Her current roles in the Claremont arts community include Acquisitions Board member of American Museum of Ceramic Art, installer Williamson Gallery here at Scripps, ceramics tech at the Lincoln Ceramic Studio, assistant to the registrar ceramics collection at Scripps College. With the talent for technology of clay, T spent a decade as a ceramic tech for Axner in Florida, and later they sent her to Laguna Clay Company in Los Angeles. After years of assisting others with their endeavors in clay, she has taken her accumulated knowledge and headed to her own studio. Geology and the Asian aesthetic is woven through her own work, simple in form and color, monumental and rough-edged, recalling the natural world. Respect for the process is ever present. T produces works that manage to exude both subtlety and strength. And today she won't be talking so much about her own work, but she has brought films of some very well-known potters, and I'm going to let her introduce from this time and cede the microphone to T. Pacini. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome. And the first thing I want to do is just thank the Fine Arts Foundation, specifically Catherine McIntosh and Beth Benjamin, for helping to organize and set up today's event. And just wanted to let you know that the 4 films you're going to be seeing today were actually from the Petterson Museum. So within the talk, you'll learn more about how they came to be. So what brings us together today is the rare opportunity to view films produced decades ago by Richard Petterson. I'm just going to give you some information about Richard. He was born in 1910 and passed in 1996. He was a ceramic artist. He first studied ceramics with Olive Newcomb, and then later was inspired by the work of Marguerite Wildenhain and Glenn Lukens. Petterson taught at Pasadena City College from 1939 to 47, was director of Summer Art and Craft Program at the University of Chicago from 41 to 46, then head of the ceramics department here at Scripps College and Claremont Graduate School from 1948 to 1976. As an instructor of ceramics here at Scripps Women's College, Petterson's contributions to the program included moving the curriculum from a low-fire earthenware slip cast program to a high-fire stoneware porcelain program utilizing potter's wheels. He further expanded the ceramic annual to include illustrated catalogs. He exposed his students to new developments in the ceramic field, and he invited leading figures in the ceramic world to visit and demonstrate their techniques. Artisans of this time often formed communities that supported one another. No more was this so than in the medium of clay. Potters of the day traveled and gave workshops for one another's classes. This was a great way of kind of showing off, sharing formulas and techniques, and promoting the exchange of ideas. Everyone knew each other. And some of those invited by Petterson and documented in the films we'll see today will go on to be major contributors to the annals of American ceramic history. Today, we're going to meet 4 such individuals who in their early years in ceramics showed a kind of virtuoso ability that we will find later helped to secure for themselves a page in the ceramics history books. We're going to start with Antonio Prieto. This is Antonio Prieto. He went by Tony. During the time of the making of these films, 1952 to 1956, Tony is working and teaching ceramics and serving as the director of the art department at Mills College located in Oakland, California. Tony is interesting in that he uses a support bar across the front of his body to lean on and support him as he works delicately with the clay. It is rare to see this, and I know of no other potter that's actually used this technique. Born in Spain in 1912, his family immigrated to the United States when he was an infant. Not much is known of his upbringing, nor of his early indications of interest or influences in his decision to become a potter. However, in 1940, he enrolls at Alfred University in upstate New York. While attending Alfred School of Ceramics, he meets Eunice Adams, who later becomes his wife. After graduation and marriage, they move to Oakland, California, where Tony will work briefly at the College of Arts and Crafts. It's during his tenure at the California College of Arts and Crafts that he first encounters Richard Petterson, teaching ceramics here at Scripps Women's College, and an exchange is made. At this time, Tony's techniques for surface decoration is masterful, and he is sought after to perform workshops. His forte was using wax resist, incising, and unique methods of applying colored slips and glazes to his forms. Mills College, founded in 1925, served as a forum for exploring arts and ideas. In 1958, he's offered the position of department chair of the art department at Mills College. Tony and Eunice move and raise their 4 sons on the Mills College campus. Tony Prieto was an advocate for the ceramic arts, contributing to periodicals and working tirelessly on marketing studio ceramics. He encouraged the Oakland Museum to have craft sales. Prieto becomes involved and influential in the dialogue of ceramics both on the national and international scene. He establishes the Mills College Ceramic Guild. Members included the likes of Peter Voulkos and Prieto's student, Robert Arntzen, who himself would later be recognized for his contributions to the field. The Mills College Ceramic Guild was an important experimental base for ceramic artists. And with all of his ceramics dealings, Tony was able to secure and collect ceramic works from California's leading artists of the time, again, including Peter Voulkos, Viola Frey, Marguerite Wildenhain, and of course his student, Robert Arntzen, just to name a few. Along with others from across the US, he also amassed an outstanding collection of works from his international contemporaries, including both Shoji Hamada and Kenjiro Kawai of Japan, and Bernard Leach of England. These names will come up time and time again during this presentation. All of these individuals were involved in and contributors to the Japanese folk art movement that was being explored by and influencing American potters at the time. In addition to amassing a fine ceramic collection, he also secured and preserved correspondence, artist statements, resumes, news clippings, photographs, and films. All of it will later be donated to the Smithsonian Archives of American Art, and all are available to view upon request. Full, voluptuous bottles with upward lifting necks. Slip and brush work unequaled. His waxed and incised spiral decoration on forms would become a calling card of his signature work. His works have been exhibited throughout the United States and Europe. His most notable student, Robert Arntzen, who later becomes known as the father of the funk ceramic movement out of the UC Davis campus, shared the following story. As a child, I fantasized about working in clay. I went to the county fair as a child and stood mesmerized by the potter who manipulated the clay with such ease. Later, Arntzen enrolls at Mills College for his graduate degree. Walking in, he sees Tony Prieto, a familiar face from his past. Tony is the potter that was demonstrating at the fair, and Arntzen recognizes him immediately. Beloved by his students and colleagues, everyone is stunned to hear of his untimely death in 1967 at the young age of 55. As a memorial to Tony, artists donate their work to his collection. In 1970, the Prieto family donates the entirety of the ceramics collection to Mills College, while his papers and research go to the Smithsonian. This video is a little bit longer than the narration, so I'm just going to give you a few more minutes to kind of view what you see Tony doing here, and then we'll move on. We have a question. Yeah. That's interesting question. I just put away a Tony Prieto piece yesterday in our collection, and I have to be honest with you, I didn't notice. Yeah. But you leave your name and number with me afterwards, and I will find out and let you know about that. Okay. Just a moment. We're going to back up just for a second here, so that you can actually see some of the drawings and him signing on the work right here. We can just play from there. There you are. Sure. So now, let me introduce you to Marguerite Wildenhain. We're going to watch her for just a moment before I get started. Marguerite Wildenhain, a robust, compact, sometimes disagreeable woman. She had the best of intentions as an exacting teacher. Here you see her in action as she prepares her clay. Author and artist Jenny Sorkin, just a few years ago, wrote in American Craft magazine that Marguerite Wildenhain was a misunderstood figure in the landscape of American craft. Hardcore European traditionalist, entrenched in her own values and in the Bauhaus trajectory. Let's learn a little bit more about Marguerite. Born in 1896 to a German father and an English mother, Marguerite enjoyed a classical, traditional European education, studying both in England and France. World War I begins and her family moves to Germany, where she completes her secondary education. Hochschule für Kunst Berlin, 1914. Marguerite studies sculpture at the Berlin School of Applied Arts. She's also taking on work as a porcelain decorator in Rudolstadt. The experience at the porcelain factory introduces her to the potter's wheel and thus starts a lifelong affair. It's now 1919, and after World War I, while traveling to Weimar, she sees a posting by Walter Gropius, founding member of the Bauhaus School. The school would become known for combining crafts and the fine arts, becoming most influential in modern design. This proclamation entices her. A new guild of craftsmen without the class distinctions which raise an arrogant barrier between craftsmen and artists. Marguerite becomes one of the first to enroll. While at the Bauhaus, she studies alongside painters Vasily Kandinsky and Paul Klee. By 1925, she's the only woman in the ceramic workshop. This is the same year that Weimar Bauhaus is shut down. And in 1926, she leaves as the first woman named a master potter in Germany. She moves to Halle in the western province of Germany and becomes the head of the ceramics department at the School of Fine and Applied Arts. While there, she also produces models for Royal Berlin porcelain production wares, as well as designs for others. Marguerite's designed dinnerware and tea sets would remain bestsellers until well after her departure, when Allied forces bombed the factories during World War II. It's now 1930, and she marries Franz Wildenhain, previously a classmate at the Bauhaus. Just a few years later, with the rise of the Nazis, she loses her job. Together, Marguerite and Franz flee to Holland, opening and operating their own pottery until 1940. Just prior to the Nazis invading Holland, unable to leave, Franz stays behind while Marguerite, of Jewish descent, immigrates to the United States. She lands in New York, and for 2 years she struggles seeking opportunities. Slowly moving her way west, she briefly teaches at Appalachian Institute of Arts and Crafts. She goes on from there to teach ceramics at the College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland. For Marguerite Wildenhain, making pots was a way of life. Unitarian, functional, sturdy wares. As a teacher, her legacy was her ceramic practice. For her, it was more to do about living a certain way and building a community, and less to do with the object. In 1942, after her 2-year tenure in Oakland, she moved and joined Pond Farms workshops. Pond Farms boasted itself as a self-sustaining sanctuary and artist community in Guerneville, California, some 75 miles north of San Francisco. Pond Farms raise their own livestock, maintain gardens and orchards, and fish ponds. Finally, Marguerite feels she's landed in a place that would share her ideals for daily communal living as a potter. At Pond Farms, Marguerite would build a house, establish a garden, and restore and convert a barn into a pottery studio and school. At this point, she's been separated from her husband, Franz, for years. Forced as a German citizen to join the army, he is stuck in Germany. While waiting for Franz to join her, she makes pots all year long and teaches ceramic courses in the summer. Eventually, her school at Pond Farms would become acclaimed and attract students from all over the world. Teaching by example with emphasis on the making and not the object itself, she often did not fire her students' work. In her mind, the making of the pots was a process of lived experience. Gaining her citizenship in 1945, she was able to sponsor her husband's immigration to the United States. Franz taught sculpture while Marguerite continued to solidify her prominence in pottery making and teaching. The living and working communally with other instructors became a contention in the relationship, and the marriage falls apart in 1950. Franz leaves for Rochester Institute of Technologies, while Marguerite stays on at Pond Farms. 2 years later, in 1952, she's asked to host a pottery seminar at Black Mountain College in North Carolina. In attendance, Shoji Hamada, leading contemporary potter from Japan, Bernard Leach, renowned British potter and author from England, and Suetsu Yanagi, director of the folk craft in Tokyo and leader of the Japanese folk movement, or sometimes referred to as Mingei. These same 3 men will later travel throughout the US and Europe, making presentations and giving demonstrations to all those interested in learning the ways and philosophy of the Japanese folk movement. Their stops after Black Mountain with Marguerite will include Scripps Women's College, hosting them, Richard Petterson. Another stop, the up-and-coming Archie Bray Foundation in Montana, where young Montana natives Peter Voulkos and Rudy Audio were just beginning to make names for themselves. Just 2 years later, Marguerite is invited to the Archie Bray to demonstrate and teach. She works alongside resident potter Peter Voulkos and resident sculptor Rudy Audio. These boys have been immersing themselves in ceramics and learning all that they could from all and everyone who came through the pottery. This includes the 3 gentlemen leaders of the Japanese folk movement who had passed through 2 years prior. Pete and Rudy's work was going in a much more free and loose direction. Marguerite was offended by them, and they in return did not care for her teaching methods. Rudy Audio was quoted as saying, "Arrogant, authoritarian and intolerant. Rather than let students try anything, she insisted that there were certain ways you had to hold your hands, and there was nothing in between, and she would not allow it. You know, like my way is the only way. Later, when interviewed, Marguerite would say of Peter Voulkos that he was extraordinarily gifted. Ironically, 5 years later, she would cancel her subscription to the day's leading craft periodical, Craft Horizons, for featuring Pete's new abstract work on the cover. Again, back at Pond Farms, her artistic stature grew. She continued with solo exhibitions and lectures throughout the country. It should also be noted that she wrote and published 3 books. Despite the negative attitudes towards her by many, she built a legacy that flourished. For many, Pond Farms was Mecca, and the teacher, leader, artist, Marguerite Wildenhain, spread an energy that made it all the way across California and the United States. Beloved and detested, her technical proficiency was undeniable. Her passion and discipline for living her ideals, putting herself into every piece she made as a process of lived experience, was a part of her belief system. Marguerite Wildenhain died at Pond Farms at age 88. The grounds and buildings of Pond Farm are now officially recognized as a California state park and have been designated a national treasure. How to spell her name?
Yeah, the last name.
Oh, Wildenhain. It's pretty straightforward, but I don't want to spell that because I'm not a good speller myself. I want to say it's Wildenhane. Yeah. Oh, clarification. There you go. Perfect. You're welcome. So we'll take just a few minutes to watch Marguerite finish up her work here as she's trimming on the kick wheel. I don't know if any of you noticed during the film, did they span down to her feet where she was kicking the treadle wheel, and she would do it with her feet pointed as if she were a ballerina. Yeah. She was very exacting and expected the same from her students. Here she's putting the finishing touches on the different parts that she'll be assembling to make her teapot. How many would like to take a class with Marguerite? Yes.
Is she doing all of her work on the moving potter's wheel into the turning clay on the left side?
Yes. Yeah. So are you asking if her hands are going in the same direction as the rotation of the wheel? Yeah.
I don't know what, I was just thinking it was the opposite side from what I did.
Right. Connie, are you left-handed or right-handed? Yeah. Right-handed. So your wheel would go counterclockwise, but if you're left-handed, it would go clockwise. Yeah. Yeah. And interesting enough, in North America, almost everyone is predominantly right-handed, and so our wheels go counterclockwise. Regardless of whether you're right-hand or left-hand dominant, in Asia, the potter's wheel go clockwise. So you would throw to the left side. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm also familiar with a lot of really proficient potters being ambidextrous and being able to work on either side. Yeah. Yeah. What I really like about Marguerite's Methodology too is, you see she's not wasting any time. She's glazing greenware. She's ready to get this in and once fire it. So no messing around.
So did she own farms as a?
No, Pond,
Or was it owned by a group?
it was owned by a group. It was a commune, or a common place, a lot of, communal kind of place. And there were other mediums going on there. And I think she pretty much was the potter there. And you got a portion of your land and you developed it. And of course, she got in there and did it all herself.
Do you know what became of the pond farm?
Oh, it's now a California state park, and it's also listed as a national treasure. So you can go and visit. Yeah.
Could you repeat where it is?
Guerneville, California, which is about 70. Guerneville. Yeah. And it's about Guerneville, right? About 75 miles north of San Francisco. Yeah. Yeah. So here you see, she, again, greenware, and she's applying her glazes, doing all the decoration. It's going to go right into the kiln, probably wet, and have a nice long candling and a long firing, and just once firing. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna, right, gonna stop that now. This next individual will sound familiar to you. It is Shoji Hamada. Shoji was born in Kawasaki, Japan in 1894, and as a youngster, he preferred the company of an older relative attending art school at the Tokyo School of Fine Arts. In his teenage years, he won awards for his artistic efforts. With his interest in the arts and seeking to skirt the traditional apprentice system, he chose to enroll at Tokyo Industrial College. When arriving to Tokyo Technical School, his initial interest was in painting, but soon abandoned the notion after discovering ceramics. He has been famously quoted as saying, "Even a bad pot has some use, but with a bad painting, there's nothing to do with it except throw it away." At Tokyo Industrial College, he and fellow classmate Kenjiro Kawai study under the exacting teacher Heizan Itaya, famed for his delicately executed porcelain forms made while wearing a white lab coat. This hardly fits with the classmates' ideas of what an artist potter should be. Shoji is beginning to plan how he wants to live as a maker, leaning towards a practical philosophy of living simply and producing useful wares. The first paying job for both Shoji Hamada and his classmate Kawai would be as ceramic technicians at the Kyoto Ceramic Testing Institute. While on break from work, Hamada travels to Japan's 6 ancient kiln sites. The different works he encounters at each site will influence his personal style in the future. He will also draw from medieval English pottery, Okinawan stoneware, and Korean pottery, as he will consciously select decoration and technique, borrowing from tradition and developing it to suit his personal style and aesthetic. In 1918, while in Tokyo, he sees an exhibition of pottery by British potter and author Bernard Leach. He was so impressed that he sought out an introduction. Bernard Leach was a potter from England with ties to Japan from his childhood, travels, and studies. Raised in the East, he was captivated by the Eastern traditions. He pushed his way into apprenticing with Yorano Shigekichi, a master potter from a long lineage in Japan. From these experiences, Bernard comes to believe that pottery imbues art, philosophy, craft, and design. His first book was written about Japanese, Korean, and Chinese ceramics of the Song Dynasty and English slipware techniques. The Potter's Book, as it was titled, goes on to be influential in contemporary ceramic design. Bernard Leach would also go on later to write a book about Shoji Hamada. The introduction between Shoji Hamada and Bernard Leach was orchestrated by Suetsu Yanagi, author of the renowned book The Unknown Craftsman and director of the Folk Craft in Tokyo. As history will tell us, together, these men, as leaders of the Japanese craft movement, will travel to Europe and the United States, making presentations and demonstrations, touting the ways and philosophy of the Japanese folk movement. The movement is in response to Mingei philosophy of folk arts, arts for the people, discovering beauty in uncommon utilitarian objects made by hand, made by unknown craftsmen using locally sourced materials. Returning to a lifestyle of essentials, living quiet and unassumingly, producing items for simple living. These were the ideals Hamada agreed with. In 1920, he finds himself traveling to St. Ives, England with Bernard Leach. Together, they build a pottery and kilns. Hamada was inspired and influenced by his stay in England, living basic lives, growing their own food, making their own clothes and furniture. However, conditions were not good for selling studio pottery, and Hamada returns to Japan after 3 years. Marrying and settling in Okinawa, he sets to task at developing his signature wares. With his energetic creativity, he uses a wide variety of techniques, including wax resist, glaze trailing, brush decoration, and enamel. He's also creating both thrown and cast pottery. In 1931, he moves to Mashiko, a mountain village north of Tokyo. Hamada was not well received as an urban, educated man. He had landed in a village long known as a traditional pottery center. Eventually, a local takes him in as an apprentice. With his relaxed nature and his prolific potting, he was soon accepted, and he went on to become an important member of the Mashiko community. It was now Bernard Leach's turn to come and stay in Japan while working alongside Hamada. Bernard's memoir from his time spent with Shoji reads as follows. He has built up his establishment from a humble start. It consists of several acres on a slope coming down through bamboos, chrysanthemums, garden land, and trees to the edge of the paddies. Everyone seems to share a spirit of content, and there is no Western excitability. Hamada works in the main house, sitting cross-legged on a low platform into which the wheel is sunk. The freedom and ease with which he does this is a marvel. But the more one watches, the more one realizes that it is a result of a balance in Hamada himself. Clear and quite conceptual thought proceeding spontaneously into equally clarified, articulate actions. Hamada, in setting up his pottery, takes on apprentices and employs many others. Apprentices work in Hamada's style, turning out large quantities of vessels processed in wood-burning kilns, firing for days, and working around the clock. In keeping with his beliefs, Shoji did not, we're going to finish up here because Hamada went a little quick. Okay. Apprentices worked in Hamada's style, turning out large quantities of vessels processed in wood-burning kilns, firing for days, and working around the clock. In keeping with his beliefs, Shoji did not sign his work. His works, however, were boxed separately from those of his apprentice. He felt strongly that each of his works from his hands would show his personality and thereby be easily identifiable. In 1953, Hamada, Leach, and Yanagi make the now famed trip abroad to share their philosophy of the Mingei movement. As mentioned before, stopping off at the Archie Bray in Montana and Scripps College here at Claremont. Hamada went on for decades living as an unassuming potter. Mingei philosophy and influence on studio pottery, seeking to capture the spirit of the nameless potter, was an ideal that spread across the world. With his simplicity, with urgency and power, Hamada inspired more potters than any other figure. Over the course of his life, he won numerous awards, including the Japanese Medal of Honor with purple ribbon and the designation in 1955 as a National Living Treasure. His works are included in collections all over the world. Shoji Hamada died in Mashiko at age 88. His home, studio, and estate have been preserved, and you may now visit it as a cultural heritage site. Hamada, one of the world's most influential master potters, representing the ideals of Mingei, as one of its leading exponents, ironically becomes one of the most famous potters of all time. So now we'll move on to Peter Voulkos. This is also a shorter film, so I'm going to try and talk quickly. So he's the third of 5 children born to Greek immigrant parents, Harry and Ephosine. It was said that Pete preferred pool halls and fishing over going to school. In high school, he worked at a number of jobs to help support his family through the Depression. Later in life, he would tell me that working at the dry cleaner was one of his favorite jobs because he got to feel all the different kinds of fabric. A real visceral and tactile experience. This story prompted a short day in the studio, and Pete and I headed into downtown Aspen to the Kenneth Cole shop to feel fabric and leather. He managed to graduate in 1942, working in Portland, casting iron fittings for Liberty ships. In 43, he's drafted and becomes a gunner stationed in Saipan during World War II. In 46, he's discharged and feeling lucky to be alive. And as many veterans did, he took advantage of the GI Bill and returned to school. Vocational testing showed Pete to be well suited for manual pursuits such as car mechanic or artist. At this point, Peter Voulkos has never stepped foot in a museum, but he thinks that artists don't have to get up early in the morning. He studied commercial art at Montana State College. His focus was painting, and he avoided taking any clay classes. Until his last semester, when he was told he had to have the class to graduate. His first instructor was a young woman, Frances Senska. The reluctant student became enamored with clay immediately. He soon befriended the night watchman, who allowed him to sneak through the basement windows where he could work in clay until the mornings. Frances Senska would once say about Pete, "You have to be really steady. Pete has a big advantage there. He can keep his hands absolutely still, and the clay has to come to him." In 1950, Voulkos wins the first of many prestigious awards for his work. It's the 15th National Ceramic Exhibition of the Syracuse Museum of Fine Arts, now the Everson Museum. In his first competition, he wins first prize. In 1951, he graduates and decides to pursue a master's in ceramics. When he told his mother he was going to be a potter, she exclaimed, "What? You're going to make pots and pans? I thought you were going to be an artist." At the end of 51, he wins another award from Syracuse, attracting the attention of potters all over the country. He marries Margaret Cohn, or Peggy, and with her returns to Montana in search of a studio to work full-time. Pete and fellow friend and artist Rudy Audio found jobs working at the Archie Bray Brick Factory in Helena, Montana. This would end up being an encounter that later is documented in the history books. Archie Bray was a businessman who made bricks for business, but he also loved the medium of clay. As a supporter of the arts, he allowed the building of a studio on the property. The boys show up and nip bricks on the factory line by day and make pots in the studio by night, eating up as much clay as could be made. Pete has developed an intrinsic, intuitive relationship with clay. Watching him work, you see the process of time and transformation. Word gets out about Pete Voulkos and what's happening at the Bray. Folks start showing up to watch and work alongside Pete and Rudy. In 1952, the Bray is visited by 3 internationals of note: Shoji Hamada, Bernard Leach, and Suenso Yanagi. Sound familiar? The Mingei movement was to revitalize the Japanese craft ideals. These gentlemen and their influences would have an impact on the clay community in America and abroad. The visit had an impact on Voulkos as well. He said of Hamada, "I'd never seen clay handled that way, so loosely, free." Voulkos also enjoyed lectures titled The Responsibility of the Craftsman and Mystery of Beauty. Just like other happenings around him, he soaked it all up. He would later say about Bernard Leach, his book is brilliant. He had this kind of quasi-Oriental thing going on, but he was really basically a jug maker from Europe. A year later, in 1953, he's invited to Black Mountain College in North Carolina to teach a 3-week course. He told me of this experience. It was the first time he had heard opera. It was the first time he saw a ballet. It was the first time he listened to poetry. The encounter and exchange were, as he said, a big eye-opening experience. Black Mountain helped him establish a new attitude toward experimentation and to seek new avenues in his own work. He was already interested in the ceramic reproduction work of Picasso, Miro, and Artigas. His exposure to new and exciting exchanges was not over. After Black Mountain, Pete spent the summer in New York City. Here he spent time at the famed Cedar Tavern, where he fell in and met with artists of the time, including avant-garde dancer John Cage, abstract expressionist painters William de Kooning and Franz Klein, whose broad brushstrokes really resonated with Pete. He also encountered painter Philip Guston. I know because Voulkos spoke to me often about Guston. We once took an afternoon off from a studio to view 2 of Guston's paintings that were hanging in a local show at a local museum. Pete spent upwards of a half an hour viewing each. At the end of his New York City summer, Voulkos returns to Montana with a new direction. Rudy Audio would comment, "You could see it in his eyes. He was different. It had an effect on him." Pete and Rudy set to task building the largest high-fire kiln in the country, this to accommodate larger works and experimentation. Pete continues to give and teach workshops, and his attendees come from all over the West. He also invites other known artists to come and teach. One such notable was Marguerite Wildenhain. She stays a number of weeks working at the Bray, and we all know how that ends. With the Bray's reputation fully established, it's now 1954, and Pete's life will change again. He accepts a position from Millard Sheets, the director of the Los Angeles County Art Institute, now known as Otis. Millard hires him to open a new ceramic department. He arrives to a bare basement classroom without a stitch of equipment or supplies, and in walks his first student, none other than Paul Soldner. Voulkos treated Paul as a peer. Paul was intricate in the operational setup of the studio and would later become known as an artist, inventor, and teacher in his own right and celebrated for his own contributions to ceramics. For Pete and Paul, this was the beginning of a close, lifelong relationship. The clay community pitched in to help establish their studio. Locals Otto and Vivica Heino, teaching at USC, lend a hand, as does Richard Petterson from Scripps College. We can assume that this is probably about the time that Richard Petterson meets Peter Voulkos and again invites him here to demonstrate. Well, here we are, at the time frame from which these cinematic treasures originate, 1954 to 1958. Voulkos is teaching. The pot shop is now the hot spot. His students now include, in addition to Paul Soldner, Jerry Rothman, Billy Al Bankston, Henry Takamoto, Ken Price, Michael Frimkes, and several others. And all of them will go on to have successful careers of their own. Pete is no longer just throwing pots. He's now embracing a more abstract vessel reference, taking large thrown forms and assembling them into complex sculptures. In 1958, he creates one such voluptuous piece called Solaris, standing 5 feet 3 inches tall. It becomes one of the earliest examples of the shift that will happen in the world of clay. It represents Voulkos single-handedly changing the perception of clay from craft to a fine art medium. His work begins to become controversial in the craft world. To his dismay, Millard Sheets' award-winning potter instructor had turned into a renegade rebel ceramic sculptor with an enthusiastic following. Beloved by students, critics, and collectors, he was just too controversial for the establishment, and in May of 1959, Sheets asks Pete to resign. Peter Voulkos' years spent in LA from 54 to 59 would set in motion the most revolutionary shift in the history of ceramics. And here we have America's most renowned ceramic artist, documented at the cusp of the change we all now know is about to happen. Pete would go on to teach at other institutions. He moves to large-scale bronze for a while, and in the 1980s meets fellow Greek Peter Kallis. Kallis introduces Voulkos to wood firing. Voulkos is elated with the natural ash glaze effects on his abstract works, and thus starts a series of iconic work recognized and collected around the world. In 1996, I call Peter Kallis and invite him to do a workshop. In 1997, Kallis returns with Voulkos. Peter Voulkos becomes my friend and mentor until his death in the spring of 2002. I want to thank you for your time and attention, and if anybody has any questions, I'll try to field them. Thank you. Yeah. Any kind of questions or comments? Anybody want to add their own personal story, knowing some of these gentlemen? And Marguerite? No? Well, thank you all so much for coming today and viewing these. Thank you so much. Yeah.